He said it at the Thanksgiving table, in front of my mother, in front of my daughter, in front of every single person who had ever quietly doubted me. He picked up a piece of turkey, smiled like he had already won something, and said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. "So, Chloe, you still doing that little online thing?" He laughed. My daughter laughed with him. My mother looked down at her plate. And I sat there with $340,000 in annual revenue, a business I had built in the dark while everyone else slept, and I smiled back at him and said nothing. "Not yet. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been in a room full of people who were supposed to love you and felt more invisible than you have ever felt in your life? Not because they screamed at you, not because they were cruel, but because they looked right through something you built with everything you had and they called it nothing. If that has ever happened to you, I want you to stay right here because this story is for you. Subscribe and hit the bell, because this is just the beginning of what happened the day they finally asked me for something. My name is Chloe, and I want to start by telling you what kind of person I was before all of this happened. Not who I became, not who I am now, but who I was then, because it matters. It matters because the people who hurt you the most are usually the ones who knew exactly how patient you were. They knew exactly how long you would wait. They knew exactly how many times you would swallow your pain and show back up at the table with a smile. They counted on it. And for a long time, I let them. I was 43 years old when my son-in-law Marcus said that to me at the Thanksgiving table. I had been married once, a long time ago, and my daughter Renee was from that marriage. Her father and I had split when she was 11, and I raised her mostly alone. Not entirely, her father was not cruel, but he was absent in the way that busy, self-important men tend to be absent. He showed up for the school plays. He sent birthday cards with money in them. He was not there for the Tuesday nights when she had bad dreams or the Wednesday mornings when she could not find her shoes and was going to be late and was crying in the hallway. I was there for those. I was always there for those. When Renee met Marcus 6 years ago, I tried very hard to like him. I want to be honest about that. I did not walk into their relationship looking for reasons to disapprove. Marcus was confident, well-dressed, and worked in commercial real estate. He had an easy smile and a firm handshake, and he always called me by my first name in that relaxed way that some people find charming and other people find just slightly too familiar. I fell into the second category, but I kept that to myself, because Renee loved him. And when your child loves someone, you find the grace. You find it, and you hold on to it, and you keep finding it even when it starts to run thin. I started my online business 8 years ago. It did not begin as anything dramatic. It began in my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, on a laptop that was 3 years old and barely keeping up, after a 12-hour shift at the medical billing company where I worked full-time. I had been reading about digital products, about printables and planners and educational templates that you could create once and sell over and over again. Something about that idea caught me in a quiet but absolute way. The idea that you could build something with your hands and your mind, and that it could keep working even while you slept, even while you were tired, even while the people around you were busy with their own lives and their own certainties. I opened a blank document that night and I started designing. The first year, I made just over $4,000. I remember that number because it felt like the most real money I had ever earned. Not because it was large. Because I had made it on my own terms, at my own pace, from something I built with my own imagination. I reinvested almost all of it. I bought better design software. I took 2 online courses, one on search optimization and one on digital marketing funnels. I stayed up late on weeknights and I worked through Saturday mornings and I kept building. Nobody in my family knew any of this was happening. That was not entirely an accident. I had mentioned it once, early on, to my mother. She had asked if it was like a blog, and I had said something like no. It is more like an online store for digital products. And she had nodded in the way that people nod when they do not want to ask a follow-up question. My ex-husband found out at some point and mentioned it once in passing. Something like, "So I heard you are selling things on the internet," and then moved on to whatever he actually wanted to talk about. The message was clear without anyone saying it directly. It was not a real thing, it was a hobby, it was a phase. It was Chloe doing one of her little projects again. By year 3, I was making $42,000 a year from the business. I had quietly folded that income into savings, into a retirement account I opened on my own, into paying off the last of the debt from my divorce, and into a small but real emergency fund. I had not said a word to anyone, partly because I did not want to jinx it, partly because I was still watching to see if it was real. But partly, if I am being honest, because I already knew what would happen if I told them. I already knew what the faces would look like. I already knew what the questions would sound like. And I was not ready to defend something I was still growing. The first time Marcus made the comment was not at Thanksgiving. That is important to understand. The Thanksgiving moment was not the beginning. It was just the one that broke something open. The first time was almost 3 years earlier, at a Sunday dinner at Renee and Marcus's house. We were talking about something unrelated, and Marcus was explaining a deal he had closed, and Renee mentioned that I had been working on something, and Marcus had turned to me and said, "Still doing your little internet project." He had said it warmly. He had said it like it was endearing. Like I was a grandmother learning to use a smartphone for the first time and everyone thought it was adorable. I had smiled and said yes and changed the subject. The second time was at a birthday dinner for Renee, about a year after that. Marcus had introduced me to one of his colleagues by saying, "This is Renee's mom. She does crafts online or something." His colleague had nodded politely. I had shaken the hand extended to me and said something like, "Digital products, actually, but yes." Marcus had laughed. Renee had smiled. I had gone to the bathroom and stood at the sink for a moment with the water running, looking at myself in the mirror before I walked back out. The third time, the fourth time, the fifth time, each one a small variation on the same note, each one with the same easy smile. Each one designed, whether Marcus knew it or not, to make sure that everyone in the room understood where I stood, that I was not a business person, that I was not someone to take seriously, that whatever I was doing on my laptop in my kitchen, it was not a real thing the way his commercial real estate deals were a real thing. It was a little online thing, a craft, a hobby, something Chloe did to keep busy. And here is what I want you to understand about why I let it go on for so long. It was not weakness, even though I know it looked like it. It was calculation of a different kind. I was watching. I was measuring. I was learning exactly how this family saw me. And more than that, I was watching how my daughter responded. Because each time Marcus made that comment, I looked at Renee. And each time Renee laughed, not cruelly, not with intention, but she laughed. She let it land. She did not turn to her husband and say actually her business is incredible or even just please don't do that. She laughed and she moved on, and she came to my house for holidays and accepted the food I cooked and the gifts I gave and never once asked me a single real question about the thing I was building. That told me something. Something quiet and something heavy. That the problem was not just Marcus. By the time Thanksgiving arrived that year, the year of the table comment, I had been running my business for 8 years. My revenue that year was $340,000. I want to say that number clearly because I want you to understand the gap between what was real and what my family had decided was real. $340,000. I had a team of 3 part-time contractors I paid fairly. I had a product library of over 400 digital items. I had an email list of nearly 60,000 people. I had a second brand I had quietly launched 18 months earlier that was growing at a rate that still made me stop and take a breath sometimes. I was incorporated. I had a business bank account, a business credit card, a tax accountant, and a quarterly meeting with a financial advisor. I had been a real business for years, a serious, growing, profitable business. And Marcus asked me if I was still doing that little online thing. At the table, with my mother sitting to my left. With Renee sitting across from me. With Marcus's parents on the far end, who I had met 4 times and found pleasant enough. With the turkey on the table that I had made because I had hosted Thanksgiving at my house for the past 5 years because I had the biggest dining room and I liked cooking and I was the one who put in the effort. At my table, in my home, where the mortgage was paid and the heat was running and the good dishes were out. He smiled after he said it. He was cutting his turkey and he smiled like it was nothing. Like it was just a small, casual, ordinary comment. And my daughter looked at me and she had this expression that I will never fully explain. It was not cruelty. It was something worse than cruelty. It was expectation. She expected me to do what I always did, laugh it off, deflect, change the subject, confirm the version of me that they had decided on. The patient, quiet, supportive, small Chloe. The one who did her little online thing in the corner and never demanded to be seen. I smiled back at Marcus and I said yes, still at it, and I passed him the bread basket, and the conversation moved on, but something inside me did not move on with it. Something had broken, not dramatically, not loudly. There was no moment of rage, no scene, no tears. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of a door closing. It was the sound of something I had been carrying for a very long time finally setting itself down. That night, after everyone had left and the dishes were done and my house was quiet, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and I opened my laptop. I looked at my dashboard. I looked at the numbers. I looked at the revenue for that year, not to brag to myself, but to confirm something. To confirm that I had not made it all up, that it was real, that I had built something real and it was mine, and no one's opinion of it had ever once made it smaller. And I started planning. Not revenge in the dramatic sense. I want to be clear about that. I did not sit there plotting some elaborate public humiliation scene. I am not that person, and that is not what this story is. What I did was quieter and more deliberate than that. I started making a list of decisions I had been putting off. Things I had been hesitant to do because I was still performing the role of small, accommodating Chloe, the one who kept herself manageable so that the people around her stayed comfortable. I had been thinking for months about restructuring my business, about moving part of it under a holding company structure for tax and liability reasons. My accountant had brought it up twice, and I had been slow about it. I had been thinking about a new product line that required a real financial investment, somewhere in the range of $30,000, which was completely within my means, but which I had been second-guessing, because some old, quiet part of me was still waiting for someone to tell me it was a good idea. I had been thinking about something else too, something I had not told a single person, but I will get to that. The first real shift happened in January, about 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. Renee called me on a Tuesday afternoon. This was somewhat unusual because Renee and I talked regularly, but the calls were usually on weekends. A Tuesday afternoon call almost always meant something specific was happening. I answered, and she said, "Hi, Mom, do you have a minute?" And I said yes and sat down. She told me that she and Marcus were thinking about buying a new house. They had found something they loved, in a neighborhood that was about 40 minutes from where they currently lived, with a yard and an extra bedroom and a school district they wanted to be in for the future. She said the numbers were tight. She said that with the down payment and the closing costs and the work the house needed, they were looking at coming up short. And then she paused. And then she said they were hoping I could help. The number she gave me was $60,000. I sat there for a moment. I said, "Tell me more about the house," and she did. She told me about the neighborhood, the yard, the things she loved about the floor plan. She told me that Marcus had crunched the numbers and that this was what they needed. She said she had not wanted to ask, but that she had been thinking about it for a while, and she knew I had some savings and she was hoping I could help them out. "I want you to notice something." She said savings. She said some savings. Even in this moment, asking me for $60,000, her understanding of my financial reality was that I was a woman with some savings. Not a business owner. Not someone with revenue and infrastructure and a financial plan. Someone with some money tucked away somewhere who could maybe help out. I told her I would think about it and call her back. I did not call her back the next day. I thought about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it, and on Thursday evening I called her and I kept it simple. I told her I was not able to give them the $60,000 as a gift. I told her that if they wanted to structure it as a proper loan, with paperwork and a repayment schedule, I would be open to that conversation. But I was not in a position to hand over that amount of money as a favor. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, that makes sense, I understand," and the call ended. I thought that was the end of it. It was not. 3 days later, Marcus called me. This was unusual. Marcus and I were cordial, but we did not have the kind of Relationship where he called me directly about anything. He was smooth about it at first. He asked how I was doing. He asked about my health. He even asked, and I noticed this, how the business was going. First time in recent memory that he had used the word business without a modifier in front of it. I said fine, thank you for asking. Then he got to it. He said he understood I had some concerns about the loan idea, but that he wanted to talk through the situation because they were really serious about this house, and the window was closing, and they were not sure another opportunity like this was going to come along. He said he knew I was careful with money, and he respected that. He said that he and Renee had a solid plan for repayment, and that he just wanted me to understand how important this was to them. I let him finish. Then I said, Marcus, I appreciate you calling. My answer is the same as what I told Renee. If you want to put together a real loan agreement with terms and a repayment schedule, I will consider it. But I am not giving away $60,000, and I am not going to change that because the timing is urgent. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, Chloe, I think you might be overcomplicating this. It is just family. And something about the way he said it, the ease of it, the assumption baked into those 5 words, unlocked something I had been keeping shut for a very long time. I said, Marcus, with respect, I have been building my business for 8 years. I have not asked a single person in this family for $1 of help, 1 hour of support, or 1 moment of recognition. I have built something real, and I have done it quietly, and I have done it alone. So when you come to me asking for $60,000 and you call it just family, I need you to understand that I have been contributing to this family in ways that have never once been called just family. They have just been expected. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, I hear you, and thank you for your time, and the call ended. I sat with the phone in my hand for a minute. My heart was beating faster than I would have liked. But I also felt something I had not felt in a long time in relation to Marcus and Renee. I felt clear. The next few weeks were quiet. Renee texted me a few times, normal things, a photo of her dog, a question about a recipe, nothing about the house. I responded warmly. I was not punishing her. I was not cold. I was just not going to pretend the conversation had not happened. And I was paying attention. Then in early March, my mother called me. This was the second wave. My mother, who is 71 years old and lives about 20 minutes from me, called on a Sunday morning and asked if she could come over. I said of course. She arrived an hour later with a coffee cake from the bakery she likes, which I recognized immediately as her version of a peace offering before a difficult conversation. I made coffee and we sat down. She told me that Renee had called her. That Renee was upset about how the house situation had gone. That Renee felt I had been cold and that the loan idea had felt like a rejection. My mother said she was not taking sides. She used that phrase twice. I am not taking sides. And then she proceeded to take a side. She told me that Renee was my daughter and that family did not need contracts and paperwork. She told me that I had always been careful with money. She said it like careful was a slight, like it meant something mildly stingy, and that maybe I was not seeing this the way Renee was seeing it. She said she understood I had worked hard, she was proud of me, she had always been proud of me. And then she said, but your daughter needs you. I poured myself more coffee. I let her finish. I said, Mom, I love Renee. I am available to help Renee. I have helped Renee in more ways than anyone in this family has ever kept track of. And what I have decided is that $60,000 needs to be a loan with terms, not a gift handed over because someone feels entitled to it. That is not coldness. That is how I protect what I have built. And I have built quite a lot. My mother looked at me differently then. There was a small shift in her expression, something between surprise and reassessment, like she had just heard a note in my voice she did not recognize. She said, not unkindly, "How much do you actually make from that online thing, Chloe?" And there it was. The question she had never asked in 8 years. Not once. And now it was here, on the morning she had come over to tell me I was being cold to my daughter, wrapped in the same dismissal she had always given it, that online thing. I looked at her and I said last year my business made $340,000. The silence was complete. My mother held her coffee mug in both hands and she did not move for a moment. Then she said, I am sorry. What did you say? I said it again. Last year my business made $340,000. I have a team, I have an accountant, I have over 400 products, I have been profitable for 6 years. I am not a woman with some savings, Mom, I am a business owner, and I have been one for a long time. She set down her coffee mug. She said I had no idea. And I said I know. That is part of the problem. We sat there for a long moment. The coffee cake was between us, untouched. My mother was processing something. I could see it moving across her face, something uncomfortable and real and long overdue. She said, Why did you never tell us? I told her the truth. I said because every time I mentioned it, the response was the same. It was a little project, a hobby, something Chloe did. Nobody asked questions. Nobody took it seriously. And after a while, I stopped volunteering information that was only going to be minimized. I kept it private because it was safer private. And I kept building it, and it kept growing, and I kept protecting it from people who had already decided what it was before they had ever looked at it. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I am sorry, Chloe. And it was the first time in this whole long chapter of my life that someone in my family said that to me without a but attached to it. That conversation changed things with my mother in a way that surprised me. Not immediately and not completely, but she started to shift. She started asking real questions, not in the way of a doubter, but in the way of someone who had realized they had been given incomplete information and was now genuinely trying to fill the gaps. She asked about how the business worked. She asked about the team I had hired. She asked what digital products actually were. She was 71 years old, and she was genuinely curious, and I sat with her for almost 2 hours that Sunday explaining what I had built. Renee, on the other hand, went quiet in a different way. She did not call for almost 3 weeks. When she did call, she was friendly but careful, like she was navigating around something she did not want to knock into. We talked about small things. I stayed warm. I stayed present. But I did not perform. I did not rush to smooth things over or to reassure her that everything was fine. Because everything was not entirely fine, and I had spent too many years acting like it was. Then in April, something happened that I did not expect. I got an email from Marcus. A formal email from his work address with his name and title in the signature. The The subject line said proposal, and the email was 3 paragraphs long. In it, Marcus proposed a business arrangement. He had a client, he wrote, a developer who was looking to partner with a digital marketing business to promote new residential properties. He said he thought my platform could be useful. He said he wanted to discuss a revenue-sharing arrangement. He said he was reaching out professionally because he thought there was a real opportunity here. I read it 3 times. I sat with my feelings about it, which were complex and layered, and then I set the feelings aside and I thought about it as a business question. And as a business question, the answer was no. Not because I wanted to punish Marcus, but because I had spent 6 years building a brand around a specific audience and a specific product type, and overlapping it with residential real estate marketing would have been a wrong turn that diluted everything I had worked to build. It was a bad business idea on its merits. But there was a second reason, and I will not pretend it did not factor in. The email arrived because he now knew about the $340,000. My mother had clearly passed along what I had told her, and the version of me that existed in Marcus's mind before that Sunday, the woman doing her little online thing, had been replaced almost overnight by a version he suddenly found professionally interesting. That shift was not invisible to me. It was loud, actually. It was almost deafening. I wrote back a short, professional email. I thanked him for thinking of me. I said that my platform was currently focused on a specific niche and a partnership of this kind would not be a strategic fit. I wished him well with the project. I signed it with my full name and my business name. He did not respond. Summer arrived. Renee invited me to a 4th of July barbecue at their house, and I went. I brought wine and a pie I had made from scratch, because that is the kind of person I am regardless of the circumstances. Marcus was cordial. He was not cold, but he was quieter with me than usual. The easy confidence was still there, but it had a different quality, more measured. He asked me how things were going. I said very well, thank you. He nodded. He moved on to talk to one of his other guests. Renee was warm that day. She made an effort. She introduced me to a friend of hers as my mom, who runs her own business, and she said it with something in her voice I had not heard before. Not quite pride, not exactly, but something in that direction. Something like an acknowledgement that had been a long time coming. I want to tell you about the thing I had been planning. The thing I mentioned earlier. The thing I had not told anyone. 8 months before Thanksgiving that year, I had started the process of buying a property. Not a house for myself, though the house I had was paid off and I loved it. A commercial property. A small building in a town about 40 minutes from where I lived, in a community I had been following for 2 years, because the area was growing in a way that real estate people would have recognized immediately. A town where a large employer had recently announced an expansion. A town where property values were starting to move upward, but had not yet moved far enough to be out of reach. I bought the building with cash. A significant portion of cash from savings I had been building for years, from the business income I had been carefully accumulating in accounts no one knew about. The building had 4 units. 2 of them were already leased to small businesses. The other 2 I planned to develop over time. I did not buy it to show anyone anything. I bought it because it was a good investment and because I had been studying this kind of move for 2 years and the timing was right. I did not tell Renee. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell Marcus. The purchase closed in October, 1 month before Thanksgiving. So on that Thursday when Marcus sat at my table and asked if I was still doing that little online thing, I was a woman who owned a commercial property outright in a growing market, who ran a $340,000 a year business, who had a financial plan and a team and a track record of 6 consecutive profitable years. He did not know any of that. He just knew the little online thing. Now let me tell you what happened in the fall, because that is where the story turns in a way I did not fully anticipate. Marcus's commercial real estate company ran into trouble. I found out through a chain of information that started with my mother, who had heard from Renee, who I suspect shared more than she intended to because she was scared, and she needed to talk to someone. The market had shifted. Two of the large deals Marcus had been working on fell through in the same quarter. The firm he worked for was restructuring. His income, which had been the primary income in their household, dropped sharply. Not to nothing, but enough to create real pressure. And the house they had been hoping to buy was off the table now. Not because I had refused the $60,000, but because the financial picture had changed enough that the bank was not going to approve them anyway. I want to be clear about that. I am not the reason they did not get that house. The market and their own income instability are the reason they did not get that house. But I noticed, in the conversations that followed, that Renee had a hard time holding onto that clarity. There was an easier narrative available, which was that Mom had been cold and refused to help, and I suspect that narrative had more emotional traction than the accurate one. I did not argue against it. I let it sit. In September, Renee called me on a weeknight. I could hear in her voice that she had been crying not long before. She told me things were hard. She said Marcus was stressed. She said they were fighting more than usual. She said she was scared. I listened to all of it. I said I was sorry she was going through this. I said I was here for her. I said she could come over any time she needed to. I meant all of it. I was not performing warmth. I was genuinely her mother and I genuinely wanted to help her. But then she said something that I had to sit very still to hear without reacting. She said, "Mom, I know we got off on the wrong foot about the house thing. I know you felt like we were asking for too much. But things are really different now. And I was wondering if maybe we could revisit that conversation." I asked her what she meant by revisit. She said that Marcus had a new opportunity, a smaller deal but a promising one, and that if they could get some capital behind them, they could potentially stabilize things. She was not naming a number yet, but the shape of the conversation was familiar. I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry things were hard. I told her I wanted her to be okay. And then I told her that I was not in a position to invest in Marcus's business deals. I told her that I kept my personal finances and any potential investments completely separate and that I made decisions in that area based on business criteria only. I said if Marcus had a business proposal he was serious about, he could send me a full written proposal with financials attached, and I would look at it. But I was not going to have a casual conversation about money when someone was scared and emotional. Because those conversations had a way of becoming commitments that were not clearly made. She said that felt very formal for family. I said yes, I know. And that is actually how I protect my relationship with you, because money and family without clarity is how families break each other. She was quiet. Then she said okay. And we talked for a few more minutes about other things, and then we hung up. Marcus never sent a proposal. What happened next was something I had not engineered. I want to be clear about that. I am not someone who manipulates situations or places people in positions to be embarrassed. What happened was a coincidence, though it was the kind of coincidence that sometimes feels like the universe aligning things that should have been aligned a long time ago. In October, I was asked to speak at a conference, a digital entrepreneurship conference held in a city about 2 hours from where I live. I had spoken at smaller events before, but this was the largest one I had been invited to. The audience was going to be somewhere between 400 and 600 people. The organizers had found me through my business, through my brand presence, through the email list, and the content I had been putting out for years. They asked me to speak on the topic of building a sustainable digital products business from scratch, with no audience and no funding. I said yes. I prepared for 8 weeks. I put together a talk that was honest and practical, and that included real numbers from my own journey, because I had learned that the most useful thing you can offer an audience is specificity and truth. The conference was on a Saturday in late October. I did not tell Renee and Marcus I was speaking. I did not tell my mother, at least not until the week before, when I mentioned it casually. She surprised me by asking if she could come and watch. I said yes, of course. She came. She sat in the third row. She listened to me speak for 45 minutes to an audience of over 500 people about building something from nothing, about the 8 years, about the product library, about the team, about the revenue growth year by year, displayed on a slide behind me in clear, simple numbers that climbed steadily from 4,000 in year 1 to 340,000 in year 8. About what it took. About the nights and the doubt and the people who called it a little online thing. I did not say who those people were. I did not need to. When I came off the stage, my mother was standing near the edge of the crowd waiting for me. She had been crying, not dramatically, just quietly. She put her arms around me and said I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. And I held on to her and I said, I know, Mom. I know. That evening, she called Renee. I do not know exactly what she said. But Renee called me the next morning. And the tone of that call was different from any call we had had in years. She said, Mom, I watched a clip of your talk someone posted online. She said I watched the whole thing. She said she did not know what to say. She said she was ashamed. I let her talk. She said she knew she had let things go on too long. She said she had heard Marcus's way of talking about my work so many times that she had stopped noticing it. She said she had not asked questions because she had assumed she knew the answer. She said she was sorry. She said it simply and she said it directly, and she did not immediately follow it up with a but. I told her I appreciated that. I told her it meant a lot. I also told her that I had needed to hear it for a while. Not because I was keeping score, but because the pattern had been real. The dismissal had been real. And the fact that it came from her, from my daughter, was what had hurt most. Not Marcus. Marcus was who Marcus was, but Renee was my child, and I had needed her to see me. We talked for almost 2 hours that morning. It was one of the best conversations we had had in years, not because everything was solved and not because the past was erased, but because for the first time in a long time she was asking me real questions about the business, about how I had built it, about what it was like to do it alone, about what I was proud of, and I answered everything. I held nothing back, because that is the version of a relationship I had been waiting for with my daughter, not the one where I was small and quiet and accommodating and available to be a soft place to land whenever something went wrong. The one where I was a full person and she was paying attention. Now let me tell you about the property. In November, a full year after that Thanksgiving dinner, I got a call from the commercial real estate agency managing one of the tenants in my building. The tenant in Unit 3, a small landscaping business, was not renewing its lease. They were expanding and needed a larger space. The unit would be vacant in 60 days. I had been thinking for some time about what I wanted to do. With that space, when it became available, I decided to open a studio, a small, professionally designed photography and content creation studio that I could rent by the hour and by the day to digital creators, small business owners, photographers, and video producers in the area. The digital content space was growing fast. I had watched it from inside the industry for 8 years. I knew there was demand. I knew exactly what creators needed because I was one. I spent the next 3 months planning it, budgeting it, and having it built out. I hired a designer. I hired a contractor. I oversaw every decision. I opened the studio in February of the following year with a waiting list of 22 bookings already confirmed before the doors officially opened. It was profitable within the first 30 days. I told Renee about it over dinner at my house in March. I had made the dinner myself, the way I always did. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had built the business 8 years earlier in the dark, and I told her about the property and the studio and how it was going. She listened. She asked questions. She said, "Mom, this is incredible." I looked at her across the table. She was 30 years old now, the same age I had been when I started over after her father and I split, when I was scared and uncertain and doing whatever it took to keep things stable. I saw something in her face that evening that I had not seen in a long time. She was looking at me clearly, not as the woman who cooked the holidays and wrote the birthday checks and was quietly waiting in the background until she was needed. She was looking at me as a person. That is worth more than any number on any dashboard. I want to tell you about Marcus, because you are probably wondering what happened to him. And the answer is not dramatic, but it is true. He and Renee went through a hard year. The income disruption was real and the stress it created between them was real. They worked through it, or they are working through it, the way two people in a marriage have to when the ground shifts. He never brought up a business partnership again. He never sent a proposal. At Christmas dinner that year, the first one after the talk, after my mother's tears, after Renee's call, Marcus was quieter than usual. He was not cold. He was just measured. Like someone who has had to recalculate in a way he had not expected to. At one point during dinner he said to me, "Chloe, I have to say, what you have built is genuinely impressive." He said it directly, without the little modifier in front of it, without the smile that diminished it. He said it like a man saying something he owed someone. It was not a gushing apology. It was a 4-second sentence at a dinner table, but I want to tell you that those 4 seconds cost him something. I could see it, and I accepted them without irony and without triumph. I said thank you, Marcus, and I meant it cleanly, because I was not looking for an apology. I was not looking for a public acknowledgement or a scene or a bow. I was not waiting for Marcus to understand me. What I had been waiting for was something else entirely. I had been waiting for myself to stop making myself small so that other people could stay comfortable. I had been waiting for the moment when I stopped needing their validation before I could trust what I knew. And that moment had come, not because of what Marcus said or what Renee said or what my mother realized. It had come that night after Thanksgiving, alone in my kitchen, looking at my numbers with a cup of tea going cold next to my laptop. That is when the story actually changed. Not at the table, not with the comment. In the quiet after when I decided. I want to say one more thing before we get to the end because I think it matters. I did not pull back from my family. I did not punish anyone. I did not build a wall. I kept showing up. I kept making dinner and answering the phone and being present. What I changed was the posture I showed up with. I stopped arriving at every gathering as someone who needed to be accepted. I stopped performing smallness to make the room feel balanced. I stopped laughing at the comments, and I stopped deflecting the dismissal, and I stopped waiting for someone to ask before I told them who I was. I became the version of myself I had been in my own kitchen all along, the one who stayed up late and studied and built and believed in what she was building even when no one around her knew about it, even when no one asked, even when the people she loved called it a little thing and moved on. That version was always there. She just stopped hiding. The business is still growing. The studio is booked out 6 weeks in advance. I hired a full-time studio manager in the spring, and she is extraordinary. My email list crossed 70,000 subscribers in April. I launched a new product line in May, and it crossed $10,000 in sales in its first week. My accountant and I are having ongoing conversations about what the next 2 years look like, and the projections are better than I had let myself hope for. I am 51 years old. I am not looking back at the years of quiet with bitterness. I built something in those years. I built it in the silence and the patience and the long, careful, private work of someone who had decided to trust herself even when no one else did. And now when people ask me what I do, I tell them. Clearly, directly, without minimizing. I run a digital products business. I own commercial real estate. I built both of them from nothing, on my own, while cooking Thanksgiving dinner and answering the phone and being present for the people I love. And I do not wait for anyone to call it a little online thing anymore.